pads. It's on. Good morning, everyone. We'll have time to fellowship later. It's time for us to begin our Bible class hour. Excited that you're all here with us this morning. When we started this lectureship series last year, one of the things the elders and I talked about, and one of the things we continue to do, is we're encouraging. Last week, we had a guest speaker from Freed-Hardeman, and every fifth Sunday we try to bring somebody from the Bible department down, one of the students, to speak and encourage them. And we wanted to do that with our lectureship too. So each year at our lectureship, at this Bible class hour, we ask a student from Freed-Hardeman to come. Last year, Caleb Norwood was with us. Caleb's a good friend, and you all know him, and we're sad that he took a job at Henderson and won't be coming here. But this year, I called Doug Burleson. I said, I need a speaker for Sunday morning for our lectureship, and he recommended our speaker this morning, Luke Tatum. Glad that Luke's here this morning with us. Luke is from Cookeville, Tennessee. He is a Bible major at Freed-Hardeman, graduating. When do you graduate? Next week? Saturday. And then he will be going to work with my friend Neil Ritchie at the Westside Church of Christ in Salem, Virginia, as their youth and family minister. So we're excited for him and for the future of the church in Salem, Virginia. I know with him and Neil working together there, that's going to be a great team. But Luke is here this morning to speak to us on the subject of one family.
Tim, I don't know what the sense is in putting the young guy in charge of the adult class, but we'll see what happens. One family. Why do you suppose is the book of Judges in the Bible? Now, I know we're probably starting in an unexpected place with that when mentioning Ephesians and one family and all those different themes, but humor me for a second. Why do you think that the book of Judges is in the Bible? Well, we call it the book of Judges, and the reason that we study it so intensely is because of the individual people that are in that book. When I say the book of Judges, a name or a list of names probably comes to your mind. The very first person that I think of when I think Judges is Samson. Because, 5-year-old me read the story of Samson and thought, that'd be pretty cool. Being the strongest person and being able to do basically whatever I wanted. That'd be pretty neat. Growing up, that was always a cool story to read. And you've got Gideon, who defeats a giant nation of enemies with 300 men. And you've got Deborah, who is the righteous woman who, with Barak's help, defeats a nation much mightier than her. And you've got Ehud, and I won't go into that story, but it's also awesome and one that a little boy would love. So many different stories in the book of Judges. And one of the reasons why the book of Judges is in the Bible is because of those people, the individual judges themselves. And we think about it in terms of those individual people because there are things about them that we would like to emulate. There are ways in which we would like to be like the judges of Israel. We see Samson's strength and his courage and the fact that he does not yield to any enemy. And we say, I want to be like that. And we see Deborah's song of prayer and thankfulness to God after the victory and the wisdom that she exudes before, during, and after the victory. And we say, I want to be like that. And we see Gideon, who is called a man of character before he even realizes that he's a man of character. God calls him before he has any reason to be called. And we see him accept that charge with no evidence, purely on the basis of faith. Now it's a demonstrated faith, but purely on the basis of faith, and is transformed into a person that is so prominent in Israel that he has to refuse kingship by the end of his story. We watch that transformation, and we recognize the fact that that transformation is something that we want to be a part of, and we say, I want to be like that. And the book of Judges is also in the Bible because there are ways in which we do not want to be like the judges. We see Jephthah's rash vow, taken for terrible reasons at terrible cost. Because he believed in rabbit's foot religion and decided that God was going to be the magic genie that was going to solve all his problems if he just was willing to do enough. And that just created more problems. That's not who God is. God is not just a genie that you make a wish and you promise something and the wish comes true. And because he has that misunderstanding, he makes the rash vow and things go from bad to worse. And we say, I don't want to be like that. Samson. That strength is impressive. And Samson knows that that strength is impressive. And Samson uses that strength to impress people. And it is his downfall. And we say, I don't want to be like that. Judges is a what to do and what not to do story for individual people. And we love it. But why else is Judges in the Bible? That's one of the two big reasons. There's another big reason. And to understand that other big reason, you have to put Judges in the context of Israelite history. So you've got Moses dies at the end of Deuteronomy, having given the people the law from God. Joshua takes over. Joshua starts the conquest, but by the end of his life, the conquest isn't completed. So at the end, he says, here are the places you still need to get. Here are the things you still need to do. Wipe out the Philistines and the other nations that are there. Do not intermingle with them. And as soon as Joshua's gone, they give up. And they do intermingle with them, and that's where Judges happens. Judges is the result of mistakes. Judges is the result of not following the covenant with God through to its logical conclusion. We've messed up. We've given up. And because we've messed up and because we've given up, chaos. And you can see that chaos unfolding throughout Judges. You start with Deborah, who is righteous. And then you get to Gideon, who is righteous, but there's a little bit of a pride problem there. And there's idolatry at the end of that story. And Gideon is ruthless towards his enemies. And then you get Jephthah, and things go from bad to worse. And then you get Samson, and it's just the total collapse of somebody who is supposed to be a great leader. And it just dissolves into chaos. And I won't even mention the last 5 chapters. Because that is some of the worst and most destructive chaos in the whole Bible. And then Samuel and Saul and David. When was Judges written? There's a line in Tolkien's Silmarillion, and I know I'm playing my entire nerd card on that just reference, but there's a line in Tolkien's Silmarillion at the end of a chapter when he's talked about different places that different groups of his nations that he's come up with, he's put them in their different places, and he's basically set the chessboard for the war that's going to happen in the rest of the book. And he says at the end of the chapter, now before that war started, there was a time of peace. I'm not going to talk about that time of peace, because nothing interesting happens in a time of peace. It's this weird literary trick, right? We hate war, we hate destruction, and we hate the idea of things all going wrong, but it's all we talk about. And Tolkien makes the point that the things that were written about the war weren't written during it. They were written when the time of peace had come, when the stability had come and everybody was on an equal playing field. But we're fascinated with the times that went wrong. The things that are being written about the judges are not being written, or at least they're not being compiled in the form we have them, while the judges are in power. They're written probably in Saul and David's reign. And you can tell that because of the way that the book ends. In those days, there was no king in Israel. and everybody did what was right in his own eyes. What does that mean? Well, now that means that there has to be a king in Israel for those days without a king to make any sense. So you've got a book written during Saul and probably David's reigns that points back to the time of the judges, and this book is saying, that's where we were, here's where we are. You can think about it, it's similar to, in a way, the Declaration of Independence. Why is the Declaration of Independence so important? Why do we study it? Why do we force our kids to know July 4th, 1776 is the foundational point in our history? It's because the Declaration of Independence says, here's what we've been. We've been colonies. We've been subservient to the king. Here's what we are now. We are not colonies. We are not subservient to the king. We are independent. Judges is that bridge from where we've been to where we're going for the reign of Saul and David. And one of the things that Judges reinforces over and over and over again is the division of Israel during the time of Judges. Notice how every single time a judge is called up, especially one of the prominent ones that they spend a chapter or multiple chapters describing, it says, now he or she, in the case of Deborah, took this tribe and this tribe and this tribe, and then frequently, and later when they came back, this tribe and this tribe were mad that they didn't get to go. The judges are not kings. The judges are not the monarch of the entire group that guides the entire group in one direction. This is a scattering of tribes, and some of them go and some of them stay, and there is no central authority. There should be, because God made it very clear through Moses and Joshua, I am the central authority. Wherever my tabernacle is, that's where you go. There should be that central unifying force, but there's not. And Judges, just as much as it's a story of individual self-righteousness and doing what's right in your own eyes, it's a story of national disunity and division. And boy, do we need that story to be told now. Can you think of any nations that are divided? That's where we were. But then Samuel and Saul and David unified it. We've been in a place where we were divided. Now we are unified. Again, sort of like the Declaration of Independence. Before, you have 13 individual colonies fulfilling different economic roles in the British Empire and doing different things relatively separate, but they come together and they say, we as a group are an independent nation. The story is that when he signed the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin affixed his signature to the document, turned around to the rest of the people who would sign the document in a moment and said, gentlemen, now we will all hang together or else we will all hang separately. Because he knew that by signing that piece of paper, either we win this war or we die. And that idea of freedom and national unity was strong enough for those men to say, that's where I want to be going. Here's where we've been. We've been disunified. We've been lost in chaos. We've been lost, period. Unity is where we're going. That's why the book of Judges is in the Bible. Okay, so now ask yourself, why did Paul write the book of Ephesians? Same answer. And you can tell because of what he talks about in the book of Ephesians. The first chapter is about the fact that individual Christians have been redeemed by the Son. We're not doing what's right in our own eyes anymore because now there is a king. There wasn't a king before. Now the Son has come to redeem his people. And now we have a unifying force. Chapter 2, starting in verse 1. You he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we also once conduct ourselves in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the others. That's where you've been. You've been walking according to whatever was available at the time. You've been walking according to the prince of the power of the air. Jesus talks about the air in John chapter 3, and he says, the wind blows where it wishes. You don't see the wind, but you see its impact. If you are walking according to your own lusts, so walking according to anything other than the unifying power of Jesus, that's what you've done. Imagine being tossed up into the air and blown away. Actually, in another place, at the Lord's Supper, Jesus talks to Peter and says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. The specific picture that he's imagining there is when you would take the head of wheat off of the stalk and you would crush it up in your hand. And when you open your hand, the chaff blows away and you're left with wheat. But I've prayed for you so that that won't happen to you, Peter. If you are lost, if you are walking the way that you want to walk, not according to the unifying power of Christ, you are that chaff being blown away into the wind. But God. And really, in a sense, you can stop it right there. Because we all know where we were before. Picture in your head your life before the church. Hopefully for some of you that's a long way past, and you are rejoicing in the unity and the righteousness that Christ offers. But picture in your mind life before the church. Or picture in your mind the last time that you knew, because none of us are perfect, you knew you were not a child of God in that moment. You had not been walking in the light. You had not been responding to Christ. Picture that. But God. God is the only reason that we can look back on that instead of looking at ourselves now. God is the only reason that we have a statement like, there was no king in Israel, because now there is one. He came to save us, and he's the difference. And if you hear me say nothing else, hear this. Do not put anyone else in that blank. Do not put anything else in that blank. Because there are going to be people who say, I've figured it out. First of all, if anybody holds this book and says, I've got all of this figured out, they're lying. Nobody has this all figured out. But there are going to be people who say, I've got it. This is the answer. This is the message. I have it. Here's what it can do for you. But I know where I've been. I know what my life looked like before God. And Paul says, I am confident God is the difference. Not me. And Paul is at pains to say that he is not the difference in his own life. It has not been by Paul's virtue or Paul's individual demonstration of change that he has done anything different or he has attained a life different than his own. God is the only answer to that question. God is the king in Israel that makes the difference. Don't you let anybody put themselves or what they think in that spot, including me. But God, who is rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us. Now notice what he says here, and we're going to come back to this. Even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. Raised us up together. And made us sit together in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace in his kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. That is sort of the nexus of the first half of Ephesians. And the rest of chapter 2, he talks about the restitution that is available as a result of that truth. Because Jesus has given us the opportunity to not walk according to ourselves, but walk according to his power. Because that opportunity exists, there is a chance for general restitution among the people of God. There's a chance for Jew and Gentile alike to obtain this relationship with God that can guide all of us towards a better place. And chapter 3 is largely Paul's prayer for that to happen. Paul talks about the calling of his specific ministry, the fact that he is specifically somebody who is aiming for that restitution to be available for all people. It's not that Paul was the only person preaching to the Gentiles. It was that Paul realized that the Gentiles had been left outside for a long time, and now they're inside, and Paul wants them to know it. Every person can know Jesus. God is knowable, what we just said. And there are some things about him that you have to know. Not everything, and no one knows everything. But there are some things about God that you have to know. And one of those things is God loves you very, very much. Sometimes he loves you enough to tell the truth about yourself. And sometimes he loves you enough to let you go through hard things to teach you hard lessons. Just like good parents do. And Paul prays that by a power that is greater than anything that we can ask or imagine, Jews and Gentiles alike in Ephesus and in the world will recognize they have a chance. There is a relationship with God that is available to them. Chapter 4, starting in verse 1. I, therefore, because of that chance, because there is this journey reality, here's where I've been, here's where I'm going, and God is the difference. Because that is the path that I'm on, the prisoner of the Lord, I beseech you, I urge you, I implore you, I'm begging you. Walk that way. Make that jump. Cross the bridge that is God in Christ Jesus and walk worthy of the calling with which you have been called. You don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to be chaff that's blown to the wind. Because God has made a path for you to become something different. Okay, Paul, I'm convinced. Because I know where I've been, I know that it wasn't working out for me before, and I know that I need something. God is that something. I'm convinced that God is the answer to the question. I'm convinced that Jesus is Lord. And I'm ready to go over here. So what do I have to do? With all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Wait. So you're saying that to go from there to here, to cross the bridge that is Jesus, I have to love that person even with... Yes. Wait. You're saying that even though he's done this and this and this, or she's done this and this and this, and I know it and it's public knowledge, that I have to... Yes. Wait. You're saying that even though they believe this, they ascribe to this mentality, which I think is destroying our nation, or they are this color, or they are this gender, or they are even though they're all of those things and they're so different than I am, I have to, yes. Wait. You mean that even though it will cost me everything to love this person in the way I need to, even though it's going to cost me financially, even though it's going to take time, even though it's going to take energy, even though my reputation might take a hit because I associate with that person, you want me to? Yes. Because I did it for you. How much time did it take Jesus to make it to the cross? Now, in a way, that's a finite answer. We think somewhere between 30 and 33 years, depending on when he was born. But in another way, how do you leave eternity to enter time? Okay. I have no idea. You can take my degree I'm supposed to earn Saturday, because that's just mind-boggling. I don't know. But I know that's a massive time cost, regardless of what the answer to that is. How much energy did it take for Jesus to make it to the cross? Well, it took enough energy that he was sweating drops of blood the night before. And that's just the emotional energy that it took. Don't even get me started on the actual walk to Golgotha. And the fact that somebody else had to carry the wood for him because he could barely carry himself. How much money did it take to get to the cross? Again, how you leave unsearchable riches of heaven to become a person is just beyond me. But even putting that aside, there's this note in 1 Kings during the reign of Solomon where Solomon gives several cities to another king that are in the northern part of Israel, and the king that he gives them to sends them back and says, "This is trash. Why did you give me these specifically?" That's Galilee. Jesus grows up in the worst part of Israel. Jesus is born in a manger with nothing. And he leaves the earth on a cross with nothing. How much did it cost? And what kind of hit did his reputation take? To go from emperor of the universe to condemned in a kangaroo court at night, which is technically illegal, by people who knew that he wasn't what they were accusing him of, but did it anyway. The disparity between where Jesus was and where Jesus ended up is massive. So what kind of numbers are we dealing with where we come up with the conclusion that I can't afford it? What's the mental math? And I'm asking myself, right? What's the mental math that I go through to come up with the conclusion that I'm better than Jesus in some sense, and therefore cannot afford enough money to give a homeless person a meal? Cannot afford inviting someone that I don't necessarily hang out with all the time to my home for dinner? Cannot afford thinking of asking someone that I've never talked to before, "What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about church? What do you think?" I can't afford that. What's the equation that gets me to that conclusion? It makes no sense. Because I'm not better than Jesus. I know that. I've already said, I know where I came from. I know what the difference Jesus made to me is. Where do I get the notion that I can't afford to help people? Paul says, I'm begging you. Don't do that anymore. Because Jesus has made a difference in you that is bigger than all of those costs combined times 1 billion. He's taken away sin. And that by itself is more than you can ever do for another person. But you can point them towards the person who can do that for them. And there should be nothing standing in your way of doing that. He goes on. Endeavoring to keep the spirit of unity in the bond of peace. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. See, here's the point. I have views about how I think worship should work. I have things in my brain that when I think of the concept of worship, I understand what that means. And I know things about what I think is the path to God. I know things that I think about the plan of salvation, and there are beliefs that I hold about what that means. And I have opinions about what makes a person an upstanding member of society. There are pictures that come to my head when I think about somebody who is just one of those reliable people that everybody comes to for everything and is just a great person. I have a picture of that in my brain. And Paul says, it's not about you. It's not about the picture that comes to your brain. There is a Lord that transcends that. There is a faith that transcends that. There is a baptism that transcends that. And if you respond to those things in the way that you really should, then if person X, Y, or Z that walks down the aisle doesn't fit my picture, it doesn't matter, because my picture doesn't matter. God's picture matters. What is God's picture? It's Jesus, who is called the propitiation for our sins. Literally, the one taking the place of us for our sins. Jesus came so that God, instead of looking at all of the accidentals, all of the things that ultimately don't matter, the things that we look at, Jesus came so that God could look at his Son and say, okay, I'll take it. I didn't earn that. It's not my job to replicate that, because here's the other thing. It's not about you being perfect either. We stress the idea of perfection so much. And yes, we should stress the idea of righteousness and holiness as much as we do, because without righteousness and holiness, there's no shot. But the only reason that you can be righteous or holy at all is because Jesus paid the difference for you. It's not about you being perfect, because if you're perfect, his sacrifice doesn't matter. If you're perfect, you could get there yourself, and he wouldn't have had to come. So why do we try and make the new person coming in perfect? Why do we put ourselves in the potter's seat at the pottery wheel and try and mold people in the way that we would have them to look? It's not about that. It's about the Lord and faith and baptism and spirit and all of these other things that are the real unifying factors. So if you want there to be one family, there's got to be one mindset. Families fall apart when there are different mindsets. Families fall apart when there are different goals. Families fall apart when people step outside of that family and betray the family in a way that betrays those goals and that mindset and the love that exists in that unified whole. Families fall apart when that happens. God has said, this is my family, this is my mindset. It is a mindset in which you love everyone. That is a yes or no proposal. Are we working to love everyone? That is not the same as asking, Are we working to greet people on Sunday mornings with a smile and a handshake? That is not the same. It is not the same as asking, are you ready to come to the country club every Sunday and Wednesday night and have fun with people who look like you and talk like you and dress like you? Not the same. Jesus says, you love everyone, period. And the church needs to remember that. Because if anyone here is anything like me, we've messed up. And we have got to start showing people that we love them in tangible ways that go past these four walls. The rest of Ephesians, from 4:7 to the end, is about how to do that. And we're going to jump through it very quickly. First, he talks generally about the first century church and the gifts that they had. Now, there are a lot of debates about this topic and about things like speaking in tongues and prophesying and laying on of hands for miraculous purpose. This should be understood in a first century context. This should be understood as a document written to people who could do these things for sure, as should 1 Corinthians, which is the other major place people go to for this debate. But here's the point. If you have a gift, and again, we would love miraculous gifts, but it's not about my picture. If you have a gift, you use it for the people around you. End of statement. End of list. If you have a gift, you use it for the people around you. Why was the rich young ruler wrong? Because he did that same mental math that we do, where we say, well, I'm better than Jesus because I can't afford to sacrifice this thing, and so I'm going to not sacrifice this thing, and so I've missed Jesus. That's the rich young ruler story. That's what we all do. And Paul says, one of the things that you have to lay down, one of the things that you have to put at the foot of the cross and be willing to do for other people is any gift you have. If you can cook, make meals for people. If you can sing, sing for people who are sad. Not just older people, because a lot of times we do older people a disservice and just assume that because they're older and maybe in a nursing home or something like that, that their life is just pitiful. Why we do that, I have no idea. And why we limit ourselves to that service instead of offering that same service to other people who are hurting, who are sad, boggles my mind. Has there ever been a prison singing ministry? I don't know. I'm just thinking about other people that Jesus specifically says are sad and that we should help. If you're, I don't know, good at speaking, maybe you talk to people about Jesus. And that's a pretty easy one. Because, yeah, there are people who dedicate themselves to doing that for a living. There are people who get degrees, hopefully, in doing that for a living and make that their livelihood. But we pretty much all learn to talk. I mean, by kindergarten, you're pretty much supposed to have a pretty basic form of that down. So have you spoken about Jesus to anyone? We could go on. We could list literally every gift that there is possible to list. But Paul's point is, use it for people as a family. If you're part of this family, if you're under this roof, you behave how the people in this family behave. The way that this family behaves is you love people. Now, Paul will say in Galatians, especially to those of the household of faith, if we can't love people in this building, we're not going to love people outside this building. If we don't do our best to actually, genuinely serve other people here, why would we do our best to actually, genuinely serve people out there? That's what the one family is about. It's got to start here. If you know someone is struggling, whether they're on a prayer list or not, do something for them. Pay for something for them. Spend time with them. Dedicate energy to them. Show Christ to them. And then in chapters 5 and 6, he talks about specific relationships. And I've run out of time, but I would note that the key verse there is really 5:21, where he says, submitting to one another in the fear of the Lord. Because that word for submit that's in verse 21 isn't in the next verse. It's assumed to be in the next verse and in the rest of that context. And he sort of describes what submission looks like leading up to that verse. So you've got this description, and then he starts with wives to husbands, and then husbands to wives, and then parents to children, or children to parents, then parents to children. And then what in that context was master to slave, what in our context can often be referred to as the haves and the have-nots. He goes both ways with that dichotomy, and he says, in every single one of those relationships, here's what you do. You submit to each other. Not the husband has 100% control and the wife just goes through the motions. And not the wife runs the house and the husband comes home to a prison. And not, we're going to tell you all the rules, kids, because I said so. And not, I'm going to obey the rules, parents, because you said so. Submitting to each other, because it's not about my picture. If God is the bridge, if God is the one that can take me to where I need to go, it's not about my picture. It's about what I can do for other people. I'll close with this, because I think it's an illustration that draws this out. I participated in a mission trip to Mexico when I was 16. I think 16 was the first time I went. I went 3 times. The first time that I went, there was a day where we spent, rather than working at the orphanage where we worked, we spent a day visiting Christians who lived there in Ensenada, Mexico, and singing songs with them and spending time with them and just being in their homes. And by home, I mean the whole house was maybe from the back of the podium to the front of this table and about that far. That was the house. And we sort of surrounded that house and we sang with them. And I remember one woman who was probably in her 70s or so, just weeping tears. Because it was the first time in months that she had heard music. That's what the love of Christ does. It bridges barriers and it brings families together. We're the family, let's do that. Thank you all very much for your time and attention.